This show is definitely the brightest sci-fi show of the year. It's even comparable to the movie Dune, the base from Asimov's novel, the Galactic Empire series. It was once thought to be the most difficult to visualize. But this year, Apple TV finally made this sci-fi epic. The first season consists of 10 episodes. It can be said that every frame of the funding is burning up the world of the future. With the help of artificial intelligence, humanity's fire is spreading rapidly throughout the galaxy. We've set foot on countless inhospitable planets, ruling over 25 million inhabited planets. A galactic empire spanning 100,000 light-years. And so it was born. The story begins 12,000 years after the birth of the Galactic Empire. The Empire's capital Trantor is a highly developed artificial shell planet, with a population of 45 billion. Look at this 4,000-kilometer bridge. The Galactic Empire's power. The chief mathematician of Trantor, Harry Shelton. Harry Shelton, the chief mathematician at Trantor, created a discipline called the history of psychology. He was able to use mathematical formulas. to deduce the development and direction of all mankind. In the years that followed, he predicted that the Galactic Empire would be over by the end of the century. He predicted that the Galactic Empire would be destroyed in 500 years, with a 925% probability of destruction. After the Empire's destruction, the human race would continue for 30,000 years until it's replaced by a second Galactic Empire. And this destruction cannot be reversed. When the news broke, alarmed the entire ruling class. In order to avoid causing turmoil, the top brass decided to keep the news under wraps. At the same time, on an agricultural planet called Nexus, a mathematical genius was born, named Gale. But on this planet, scientific research is forbidden. On a planet where scientific research is forbidden, if the religious priests found out about her, there's only one way out. Luckily, Shelton found Gale and recruited her as his companion. Gale said goodbye to her parents. With a heavy heart, he left this barbaric backward planet. He made his way to an Imperial jump ship. During the jump, everyone had to go to sleep. But during the jump, Gale woke up unexpectedly. This had never happened before. The guards had to sedate Gale. But after Gale woke up. But when Gale woke up, she didn't say that she had woken up. Because during the jump, a normal person's consciousness and body would be torn apart. That's why Gale was different. But she kept it a secret. Then they took the space elevator. After 14 hours of high-speed descent, they finally arrived at the bustling planet of Trantor. The entire planet is covered in a man-made shell. But there are still billions of inhabitants, live in the underground city of Trantor where they can't see the sun. Their skies are filled with images from the servers. And everything here belongs to the emperors. There are 3 different clones of the emperor: Dawn, Day and Dusk. They have supreme power. Shelton's theory of destruction was taken as a threat by the emperors. The emperor saw it as a threat. The inhabitants of the city who believed in Shedden were mercilessly executed. In an instant. The 3 brothers in front of you are clones from a different time. Dawn, Day and Dusk. They are the rulers of the Galactic Empire. When the Dusk brothers are about to die, the Day brothers will take his place. And the Dawn brothers replace the Day brothers. This cycle has been going on for 4 centuries. Dan Moore is the first minister of the Empire. He is responsible for assisting the king in the management of his affairs. As well as dealing with military conflicts. Anacreon and Despise. Not long ago there was an upheaval. An Imperial agent was killed in the fighting. So they brought in envoys from both planets for questioning, to try and stop the war from breaking out. Just a short time ago, mathematician Harry Sheldon accurately predicted that in 500 years, the Galactic Empire would be irreversibly destroyed. And from that point on, human civilization will be plunged into a 30,000-year period of barbarism. But the king, in the name of treason, in front of the entire planet's inhabitants. At that moment Sheldon proposed a solution. Since the destruction of the empire could not be reversed, he would shorten the 30,000 years of barbarism to 1,000 years. He would work with 100,000 scientists to write a galactic encyclopedia, allowing a new civilization to grow rapidly in 1,000 years, to replace the next galactic empire, and continue to write the book of human civilization. But the king still wouldn't trust Shelton, and sent an agent to convince the mathematical genius Gale to point out the errors in Satan's psychohistory. And Gale testified against the king at the deposition. He was convinced that Shedden's predictions were right. The king couldn't accept that. He decided to execute them both. But just then, Tristan's bridge and station were attacked simultaneously. War was imminent. The greatest project in the galaxy collapsed. The bridge connecting the station was like a garrote. It wrapped around the entire planet. Trantor itself is a planet covered in a man-made shell. The disaster reached at least 50 layers below the surface. Over 100 million casualties. The king was furious. He brought Shelton and Gale in for questioning. Shelton said that he had predicted this would happen. But he couldn't pinpoint when it would happen. And he didn't know who was behind it. because he couldn't predict the individual. And the attack was just the beginning. The king realized the crisis. This time he listened to Shelton's solution, and agreed to let him write the Galactic Encyclopedia. But to avoid unnecessary panic, they had to travel to a planet on the edge of the Galactic Empire. To the edge of the Galactic Empire to fulfill their mission. But it didn't seem so simple. The king assigned them to the endpoint. In effect they were exiled. Endpoint is 50,000 light-years from Trantor. But the king didn't provide them with a jump ship. So it would take them 878 days. It would take them 878 days to reach the endpoint. But for the future of the galaxy, they couldn't care less. It wasn't long before Shelton took his team on the long journey to the endpoint, the destruction of an iconic symbol of the Galactic Empire. And it confirmed Shelton's theory of the Empire's destruction was correct. The king sent the First Minister of the Empire Danmore. The king sent the First Minister of the Empire Danmore to lead an elite team to a dwarf planet called Ephra. Because this is where the suicide bombers are made. The researchers noticed something unusual. They tried to destroy the data. But before they could react, they were killed on the spot. It turns out that the nanobombs were able to avoid security checks. That's how the radicals were able to pull off the attack. They installed a neurostimulation device. They installed a nerve stimulation device on the researchers. But after questioning them, they had no connection to the mastermind. Danmore had been hit by shrapnel. But instead of bleeding his body oozed an organic fluid. It turns out she's an artificial intelligence. The only one left in Kawartha. The Dawn King said his kind was dead. But she argued that his kind wasn't dead. They were just destroyed by humans. So she did her best to act human. The Starbridge incident caused hundreds of millions of casualties. And hundreds of thousands of bodies floating in space. As king of the day, he couldn't even keep the bodies of his people alive. It made him very uneasy. So in order to calm his people, he decided to strike a devastating blow at Anacreon and Despise. On the stars of Anacreon and Dispossession. Despite the Twilight King's opposition. But tragedy struck. This is a live broadcast of cosmic proportions. A brutal execution. The ambassadors' entourages were executed one by one. But he spared the ambassadors. They were left to watch their planet being trampled on. It was more painful than death. King Dusk was a little disappointed by the Day King's actions. And the Dawn King said he didn't understand his brother's actions. But Danmore told him, the three of you have always had the same way of doing things. On the other side, Harry Shelton's science team have traveled in a sublight spacecraft to the depths of the universe. But a sublight ship can't jump through space. Like jump ships they can jump through space to reach a telestar 50,000 light-years away. 50,000 light-years away. The scene changes. Gale leads the team to a dark cave, mining for ore. But just then, a strange alien creature attacked them. In the midst of the chaos, the sparks from the bullets ignited the combustible material in the rock crevices. There was a violent explosion. It turns out this was just a simulation. It seems the environment on Endpoint is very dangerous. Several simulations have failed. Gale has calculated that they'll be 5 years. 5 years after they landed on Endpoint. The mortality rate is 34%. Building the base was more difficult than Shelton had ever imagined. In the meantime, Gale and Shelton's adopted son had a relationship. And Gale became pregnant. But on a sublight ship. In a sublight ship they can only keep the fetus until they reach the telestar. Shelton's side did another projection. But it didn't work out so well. Because in his previous projections was based on the premise that he was dead. But now he was alive. This made him ponder. And Gale revealed a shocking secret. That her prediction of Shelton was flawed. In order to protect Shelton, she lied to the king at the trial. And then at a seminar to write an encyclopedia. Gale and the other scientists. With the other scientists. This left the entire team in a state of confusion. Shelton looked at the demoralized team. Shelton looked at his demoralized team and felt a little guilty. He told everyone involved in the base program. Each and every one of you has been handpicked. You'll be remembered for what you've done. You will be remembered forever. The crew's morale was renewed. But Shelton's own heart had begun to waver. At dinner, Shelton brought up the old story of his adopted son. It made the boy uncomfortable. But Shelton laughed it off with a light-hearted smile. With a hint of sarcasm. And that's when the tension between the two grew. Until one day, tragedy struck. Shelton was attacked by his adopted son. The greatest mathematician in the Galactic Empire. The greatest mathematician in the galaxy. And Gale was there to see it. Before she knew what was happening. Before she could figure out what was going on, her adopted son took something from Shelton's ear. And quickly loaded Gale into an escape pod. And released Gale. 400 years ago Creon I ruled the Galactic Empire. Trantor flourished under his leadership. But people have to live and die. The Emperor was no exception. He was nearing the end of his life. But how could he let go? A galactic empire spanning 100,000 light-years. He wanted to see the bridge rise. Standing at the center of the galaxy. Looking down on everything he'd created. So he put his cloning program to the biochemist Danmore. And so began a new chapter in the empire where the old, the young, and the middle-aged ruled at the same time. More than 400 years later, 19 years have passed since the Starbridge explosion. The former Twilight King has reached the end of his life. He looked at the wreckage of the Star Bridge floating in space. He felt a sense of guilt. The masterpiece that Creon the First cared most about had been destroyed by their hands. It was the last meal of the Twilight King. Afterward, the brothers showed him the remains of the Star Bridge. The brothers promised him that they would create something even greater. In honor of Creon the First. In honor of every king who ever came. From now on the Star Bridge would no longer exist. The Day King will take his place. And the Dawn King will take the place of the Day King. And when the new Dawn King is born, is when the Dusk King goes to his grave. He'll be baptized in a flash of lightning. This is the final destiny of an emperor. 17 more years have passed. The Dawn King has grown into a new generation of handsome imperial boys. In the last few years, the base colonists have arrived on the endpoints. Though Shedden was stabbed to death. But he had predicted the Empire's prophecy. And his own death was part of that prediction. He had built a vault on the planet. And he'd already made arrangements for what was to come. When the colonists would land. Where to build their bases. He predicted it all. But there was a time that had to be met. To open the vault. Beyond that, any creature that comes near the vault will be disturbed by a mysterious force. Those who don't know about it, they call it the legacy of a divine civilization. Others say it's a surveillance station built by the Empire. Therefore, they chose an area far from the dome. They dismantled the ship. They dismantled the ship and used its frame and parts to build an initial base shelter. On this barren planet. On this barren planet they would write the Great Galactic Encyclopedia. To find a way to save the Galactic Empire. This girl Cypher. She's been obsessed with the vault since she was a child. When she grew up she became the vault's guardian. Her job was to keep people away from the vault. But there were always a few naughty kids. When Cypher was resting. They used it as a challenge course. The one who dared to come closer would win. The first kid didn't make it more than a few steps. He was scared out of his wits. But then a kid appeared who wouldn't give up. He took one step at a time and got closer and closer. The result was predictable. A couple of kids ran for their lives. Luckily Cypher showed up just in time. He saved the kid's life. And for some reason she was able to get. She asked her mother many times about her life. But she never answered. But that very day, Cypher realized that the vault's magnetic field was expanding outward. And in the base town of Endpoint. In the base town of Endpoint there was a group of people fulfilling Shelton's mission. For over 30 years. They've been writing the Encyclopedia of the Galaxy. While observing the anomalies of the vault. There's not much left of what was once a large team of researchers. And this desolate barren planet doesn't produce any metal ores. They have to source their supplies from other planets. Cypher's boyfriend Hugo is the base's purchasing agent. He spends a lot of time flying cargo ships. In his cargo ship, whenever Hugo returns home with a full load, the children at the base would get very excited. Because he would often bring them snacks. Snacks that weren't available on Endpoint. Like chocolate. Hugo's return this time could only be on the Endpoint star. Hugo could only stay on the Endpoint star for a short period of 29 hours. After that he had to go out to buy more supplies. Hugo told Cypher about the planets he'd been to. And Cypher, who had never left the Endpoint planet. He was also full of fantasies about outer space. Hugo also hoped. Hugo wanted her to go with him to see the outside world. But Cypher had her own mission. She couldn't leave here. At night, Cypher went out on her normal patrol. But when she came near the dome, she looked through her binoculars and saw a young boy running. Cypher warned the boy not to run in the night. But he didn't look back. Into the wreckage of the ship. When Cypher chased him into the hull, the boy was long gone. But that's when she encountered a monster indigenous to the Endpoints. It was called the Bishop's Claw. But Cypher had a cute name for him. Mabel. The next day they looked through their telescopes and saw that 3 Ansation ships were approaching. They were approaching the endpoints of the planet. 36 years ago Imperial warships were headed for Anacreon. And Despise. In a deadly strike. This time, it's very possible that they're here to retaliate against them. And Hugo is a dispenser. Perhaps he can use his position to get close enough to an android ship to find out what's going on. But in most people's opinion, that the matter should be brought directly to the Empire's attention. And Cypher as guardian of the endpoints. His first thought was to check the base's armory. But the arsenal was full of junk. It's basically useless. What's worse, their communication with the Empire has been cut off. The Ansations are blatantly attacking Endpoint. At this critical moment, Cypher's mother had to turn on Selden's formula. Perhaps Cypher's unusual ability to understand psychohistory and figure out a way out of this crisis. But it didn't work out that way. No one but Shelton and Gale. No one could decipher the formula. But now Shelton is dead. Gale is lost in space. They were on their own. That night, Cypher saw the boy from last night, running into the wreckage again, seemingly guiding Cypher. She followed him all the way. But just then, She accidentally found a Mabel with an arrow in her side. And it was a group of Ansacians who shot Mabel. At the critical moment, Cypher had a brilliant idea. She brought up the Imperial Treaty to negotiate with them. They claimed to be scavengers. And they claimed they were scavengers. They were looking for a navigation device for the colony ship. Then they threatened Cypher to take them to the base's main tower. But the fence here is biometric. Only one of them can follow close behind. So they can't be recognized as an anomaly. Therefore, the curly-haired girl alone followed Cypher to the main tower. But at that moment, Cypher saw the mysterious boy again. Cypher saw the mysterious boy again. But he didn't see anything. Suddenly Cypher had an idea. She used a shortcut as an excuse. She drove straight to the dome. The result was predictable. The curly-haired girl passed out on the spot. Then Cypher took her back to the base. The base is now facing an unprecedented crisis. But without instructions from the Empire. They don't dare to do anything without the Empire's instructions. But they can't contact the Empire. It's not a good idea to go on like this. So Cypher and Hugo came to Curly. They tried to find out some reliable information. But Curly was very tight-lipped. She wouldn't give us any information. In the end, Sifo used the method of provocation to break down her psychological defenses. The curly-haired girl instantly lost control. She started speaking in a fluent alien dialect. Her heart raged like a beast. Cypher saw the smell of death in her. But he also heard something from her. And based on the bow and arrow in her hand, and the bow and arrows in her hand, that the curly-haired woman in front of him was not a scavenger at all. She is a big hunter who is in charge of the Ansation army. At the same time, the Ansation army has surrounded the base. Shedden's formula can only predict the behavior of a group. It can't predict the fate of an individual. He was once approached by an emperor. He was asked to predict the fate of the next emperor. But he didn't predict that the new emperor would be so weak. Luckily the emperor had an aura of armor. It didn't hurt him at all. The gardener on the other side was almost scared to death by him. On the other side of the day, the king is enjoying the beauty of his harem. His movements must be gentle. The slightest pressure will trigger his aura armor. But just as the two of them are finding their rhythm, Danmore suddenly appeared and interrupted them. It turns out the Pope of Proxima has died. The rise and fall of civilizations. Shedden had already solved the mystery of the rise and fall of civilizations. Faith is different. It's more like a powerful weapon. That's why the Empire is so afraid of Shelton's predictions. The Empire rules a galaxy 100,000 light-years across. But it can't intervene in the realm of faith. And the ambassadors are here to choose the next heir. The emperors hope to promote Garant to be the next pope of neighboring stars. But then another successor, Halima, appeared. And he had a slightly higher number of supporters. This made the emperor very angry. Because this woman Halima advocated a return to the days before the Empire. The emperor was planning to make a personal trip to neighboring planets to deal with the matter of the pope's successor. They are taking this matter so seriously. It's because there are 3 trillion followers of the translucent cult. There are 3 trillion of them in the entire galaxy. If anything goes wrong, it would upend the entire galactic empire. At this time there is also unrest in Chuanta. Because of the bridge crash 36 years ago. 36 years ago the bridge crash caused the melting of the 77th floor's thermal chamber. And 36 years later, they still haven't dealt with it. But just then, they discovered that a communications buoy near the Big Horn was offline. And that buoy was the communication link to the fringe. Now they finally realized what was going on at the endpoint. One thing led to another. It made the emperors believe in Shedden's predictions. Because Shedden had said exactly the same thing at the trial. Shelton predicted that when you feel vulnerable, soon other forces will begin to destroy the empire. One of the major religions in the galaxy will surely start an agitation. There may also be a local uprising on Kawartha. In fact 30 years ago the Twilight King gathered 1,000 of the empire's finest. Had gathered 1,000 of the empire's best mathematicians to crack Sheldon's formula. But 30 years later, they still haven't figured it out. And falsely claimed that Shedden's prediction was an act against reality. It made the king angry. He even scared people to death. The Twilight King sent Imperial General Dalwyn with an army to go to the endpoints immediately to investigate. He also gave a special instruction. He asked him to remind the base not to hide anything from the Empire. On the other side of the planet, the base is facing an unprecedented crisis. The Ansacians may break through the perimeter at any time. But they couldn't reach the Empire. So, Cypher assembled the few fighters left in the base. They were ready to take the battle head-on. But at that moment, Cypher suddenly had a hallucination. She came to the Chuan Tao library. Here she saw the mysterious boy again. Why did the visions come one after another? Cypher had no idea. But there must be a reason for his appearance. Maybe it's a sign from the dome. Maybe the key to solving the crisis lies with Cypher. Meanwhile, the Ansacians have set up their weapons outside the perimeter wall, preparing to breach the base's barrier. They can't hold out much longer. That's when Hugo suggested she could escape in a spaceship to another planet for help. And that would be a dangerous maneuver. She could be shot down by the Ansacians before she even got into orbit. But Hugo didn't care about her own safety. She insisted on trying. At that moment, Cypher suddenly realized. The vault must have something to do with Shelton. Because when she was hallucinating, she saw the Trantor library. And Shelton was the director of the library. The base is protected by a walled force field. The base is safe for now. But no barrier is strong enough. Can't withstand a sustained attack. The northern corner is about to be breached. We're on the verge of a major battle. At the moment of crisis, there's a loud boom in the sky. The Empire has jumped into orbit around the Telestar. The Savior has finally arrived. But the Ansasui were not impressed. They've been expecting the Imperial leap for a long time. This is exactly what they wanted. After scanning the planet, they soon spotted the reassurance fleet. The Admiral contacted the base immediately. They received a request for help from the base. Sifo advised them to stay away. They should wait until they knew what the Ansacians were up to. But the general wanted to take Curly to the jump ship. He wanted to interrogate her himself. But just then, the Ansacians turned on their signal blockers. They cut off the base's communications. They've been listening in. As soon as the general said he'd bring in Curly hair, they cut off the signal immediately. They didn't want to give Cypher time to make a judgment. Cypher realized that they must be up to something else. So he rushed back to the base immediately. But he was too late. They've already taken her away. They took Curly to the main tower. They were going to take her to the jump ship. But at that moment, she activated the pulse jammer hidden in her eyes. The moment it took effect, the force field controller was destroyed. The base's barrier disappeared. The Ansatian army invaded the base. The defenseless inhabitants of the base could only flee in all directions. Many were killed and injured. At the same time, the Imperial team on the jump ship also noticed something unusual. They're ready to go. They'll be landing on endpoint in 5 minutes. And that's when Curly has kidnapped Cypher's mother. It was the moment of truth. Cypher managed to save her mother. The two of them fought together. After a fierce fight, Cypher defeated Curly. But her mother was captured by the Ansacians. Cypher was forced to surrender. Then the curly-haired girl took the two of them to the top of the main tower. She wanted them to feel the pain of watching their loved ones die. The pain of watching their loved ones die. The Ansacians believed that Shedden's prophecy had angered the Emperor, which led to the bombing of their planet, destroying the base. Disrupting Shedden's plans was their goal. That's when the jump ships descended over the base. They sent a warning to the Ansacians. But the Ansacians were ready. The jump ship with its own black hole was lost. The base's 30 years of hard work were destroyed. The next day when the Ansacians came to look at the wreckage, they found the general alive. They captured the general alive. The people of the base. Except for Hugo and Cypher's father who escaped. Except for Hugo and Cypher's father who escaped, there were only 2 children left. Everyone else was captured. They snuck into the room where Cypher was being held. They found the right moment to work together seamlessly. They managed to save Cypher. Cypher had no idea. It was these 2 troublemakers who saved him. They dragged Cypher all the way to the geothermal tunnels. And they made fun of Cypher's weight. That's when one of the kids mentioned it. The invincible battleship. Cypher was surprised. Where did they hear that name? It turns out they overheard a conversation in the base. When they were rescuing Cypher, they overheard an android conversation at the base. And this invincible battleship has disappeared for centuries. Could the Ansacians have found the invincible? Because they said earlier, they're looking for the colonization ship's navigation system. Cypher realized the gravity of the situation. Just outside the tunnel, they met Hugo and Mayor Harding. As far as they knew, they know that the Ansacians have re-established a walled-in force field, which means they can't get back to the base. They're gonna have to find a way to take it back. But Cypher had an idea. The Ansation frigates are parked near the geothermal field. She thinks the Ansacians are trying to build a Jupiter-class ship. She thinks the Ansacians are trying to build a Jedi-class ship. If they get their hands on it, the entire galaxy will be devastated. Recently Cypher has been having a series of hallucinations. There must be a reason. Cypher convinced his father to abandon the base for the time being. He's going to destroy their frigate. Let's talk about Cypher's father. He grew up in the underground city of Trantor, so he wasn't in the best physical condition. He's weak when it comes to high winds. Along the way, Cypher's father told him about the splendor of Kawartha, but he didn't care for it. Because behind the splendor of Kawartha was endless lies and deception. Trillions of people worked hard to bring about Kawartha's prosperity, but most of the people of Chuan Tao were living in dire straits. Finally they came to the geothermal plant. Cypher observed that the Ansacians were setting a bomb near the utility room. Their goal was to destroy the entire base. Cypher decided to destroy the frigate from a distance. But just then, she had another hallucination. This time, his consciousness connected to Gale's body. It turns out Shelton's death was part of the plan. But he couldn't do it himself. That's why he let his adopted son take the fall. And him being with Gale would have messed up the plan. I wish I'd never met you. But you can't change the past. You're the one who should have been in the escape pod. You went straight to the freezer. It was designed for you. Leave her out of this. No wonder Gale's ship was captured. He was the only one the system had access to. Cypher woke up. The Ansacians discovered their hotspot. It was chaos. But then the mayor snuck around to the other side. To do something about it. The Ansacians' firepower. The Ansacians focused all their fire on Sifo and Hugo. But they didn't notice. The old mayor, behind them, was running toward the frigate with the explosives in his arms. But in the nick of time, the Ansacians found him. Cypher cleared out the sidekick at long range. But the mayor was still down. It was a matter of life and death. He detonated his explosives. The mayor destroyed the frigate with his own life. The only reason he ever joined the base program was simply because the man he loved was here. But in the end he bought into Shelton's plan. And he gave everything for it. Cypher was ashamed that her decision cost her father his life. She felt like she screwed up. And Shelton said that the entire galaxy can be turned around. That one person's actions can shift the galaxy to another possibility. And she could be the chosen one. During the night, the two sneaked into the base through the geothermal tunnels. But before they could make their move, they were caught in the act by the Ansacians. All 3 of their frigates were destroyed. Now the only ship left to leave the endpoints is Hugo's freighter. And he's the only one who can operate it. But Hugo, in order to save Cypher's life, he lied to the curly-haired sister that the airship had to be operated with Sifo before it could take off. And so under Hugo's tutelage, Sifo, who had never flown an airship before, learned on the spot. He successfully launched the cargo ship, the Ansacians, and brought along some of the base's scientists who could be useful to them, and the captain of the jump ship. They were escorted by the base's inhabitants. They left the endpoint. In some uncharted territory deep in the universe, an escape pod slowly came into view. That's right, she's Gale. Floating in the darkness of space for over 30 years. Until now he was captured by the ship. Because the pod has a hibernation function, Gale is still the same. But he doesn't know where he is. Inside the pod. And the dagger with Shelton's blood on it. He thought about everything that had happened. Gale was on edge. She kept banging on the door. But no matter how hard she tried, no one answered. She almost lost her hand. But then, just then, a miracle occurred. The dagger in her hand was suddenly sucked into the door handle. The hatch just magically opened. Could it be that her blood fused with Shelton's and triggered some kind of program? Gale cautiously made her way through the corridors to the lobby of the ship. But the ship was empty. There was nothing but silence except for her. Gale ran to the console and asked the intelligence system where the ship's crew was. But the system said he was alone. Then she asked the system what year it was. The system's answer surprised Gale. She had been asleep for 34 years and 223 days. But when Gale tried to send a distress message, the system said she didn't have enough authority, and she couldn't change the ship's course. So she searched the Empire's news. She found something. In the news she read about Selden's death. It was devastating to her. And her boyfriend remained silent after his arrest. Until the judge brought up Gale's name. And then the boyfriend spoke. He confessed to what he had done. He said to the judge, "I know no one can understand what I've done. But don't lose faith in the program." Gale cried uncontrollably at this scene. She was so helpless. She thought about ending her life. But just then, a pair of invisible hands stopped her. Just then she remembered what her teacher had told her. Knowledge gives us the means to survive destruction and wait for our rebirth. Gale was a different person. She put on her uniform again. This time the helplessness on her face turned to hope. Gale used her brilliant mind, without access, to browse the star map and fool the intelligence system. Step by step he found his location. It turns out he's near the Jade Spirit Stream in the Argo sector. The next step was to trick the system into giving him a direction of travel. Gale used the spectral frequencies of the stars. To figure out the ship's course. But she couldn't figure out the ship's final destination. And the only person with access was her boyfriend. Which surprised Gale even more. That's when Gale came up with a bold idea. She put on a spacesuit and climbed to the outside of the ship. Using the infrared filter on her helmet, she identified the target planet with her naked eye. It turned out that the ship's destination was Helicon. That's where Shelton came from. And a lot of people suspected her of killing him. She'll be dead if she goes there. But there was no response from the intelligence system. That's when she noticed a pool of blood on the floor. She went over and looked. She saw a holographic image of Shelton before he died. After questioning the system, it's a form of quantum consciousness. But the neural ports aren't connected. They can't talk to each other. But Gale doesn't have access. There's no way to activate the program. But Gale used her voice to guide Shelton's consciousness little by little, and broke him out of his death spiral. Shelton told Gale. Before they left Trantor, he had implanted a data unit. Which just happened to be synchronized with the dagger's port, recording all his thoughts and memories. But there seems to be a mistake in the middle. But he's not sure what it is. Gale told him. They're on a ship called the Raven, destined for the planet Helicon, Shelton's home planet. And that's when Shelton snapped out of it. He said that Gale shouldn't be on the ship. He said that Gale wasn't supposed to be on the ship, that he was supposed to be at the base on Endpoint. But he didn't know that. It all went haywire. Shelton kept asking about his adopted son. Gale had to tell him the truth. Shelton became unstable. His consciousness was being torn apart. After a struggle, Shelton's consciousness disappeared. The ship's systems shut down. The Raven's oxygen level is down to 2%. The temperature is dropping. If Shelton doesn't regain consciousness, Gale will suffocate. The moment of truth. Shelton's consciousness has reawakened. Shelton reawakened his consciousness and restarted the Raven's life support system. Shelton explained everything to Gale. His death was a crucial step in the plan. Because the base needed more than just a spiritual leader. He needed a myth that would last 1,000 years. And the plan worked. They had previously predicted that the mortality rate after landing on Telestar in 5 years would be 342%. But in reality, the base's mortality rate is half of what they predicted. In other words, Shelton's death solidified the base. But Gale doesn't think the base is a religion. And you, Sheldon, are not a god. You're just a man with a high opinion of himself. Gale never believed Shelton would give his life for the program. That's when Shelton mentioned that he had Lee analytic syndrome. He inherited it from his father. A condition that causes his senses to deteriorate rapidly. Not to mention the challenges of the Telestars. If he had lived, I'm sure there'd be a lot of people accusing him of being a lunatic. For bringing them to this frozen barbaric planet. It makes sense. They simulated the environment of Endpoint. They've simulated the environment of the endpoints. They predicted the outcome of any landing. That's when Shelton's heart began to waver. That's when Shelton's heart began to falter. Combined with the onset of lysis syndrome. He was losing his ability to perform. At the peak of his powers. He stored his memories and thoughts. It was the smartest thing to do. So his death was not a prediction. Because he couldn't predict the fate of an individual. All he did was pave the way for a plan. To put it bluntly, he was talking about the dream of the base program. To the scientists. It was all a lie. After all, a dead man has a better chance of becoming a legend. A dead man has a better chance of becoming a legend, of making his descendants willing to give everything to the program. It didn't take long. The ship arrived in the rocky debris region of Helican. Gale couldn't understand why the ship was here. Shelton explained. He was going to take matters into his own hands. But then he realized that his adopted son wouldn't leave Gale. So he changed his plan. He had his adopted son kill him. Then he had the foster son enter the cryopod. And meet him here. But then Gale burst into the room. The original plan was disrupted. If the foster son escapes at this point, they would have put Gale to death. So he sent Gale to the ship instead. All because he loved Gale so much. Gale couldn't accept that. He thought Shelton had lied to them. He thought that Sheldon had lied to them. But then Sheldon said, the moment you solved the Abraham's conjecture, you accepted the role. Because she openly signed up for the math competition. She knew it would put her parents in danger. But she still came to Trantor. It was Gale's choice. But now Gale's boyfriend is dead. And now she's here by mistake. And she blames it all on Sheldon. But Shelton began to question Gale. Why she broke into the room in the first place. Instead of swimming in the pool. Because she doesn't usually finish her training at that time of day. Gale finally revealed her secret. Because she was in the pool. In the pool she got a bad feeling. There was no picture of it. It was more like a physical urge. In other words, her body anticipates danger. Before she realizes it. For example, before the bridge crashed. Before the bridge crashed. On the jump ship. Before the agent even spoke. She knew what they were going to say. Just then. A meteorite fragment pierced the hull. But Gale predicted it ahead of time. That's what Shelton couldn't predict. He couldn't predict when it would happen. Gale could. It's not a mathematical calculation. It's her innate ability to see the future. In the rocky debris ring of Helican, the Raven's ship is struggling to move forward. As the debris slaps against its hull. Gale's life was no different. Gale told Shelton. She's had the ability to see the future since she was a child. She saw her family. She saw her family and the entire planet swallowed up by the sea. And it was because of her gift. She chose to study math. She wanted to use math to prove her predictions wrong. She wanted to use math to prove the predictions wrong, to find a way to avoid the disaster. But it was all in vain. Because predictions can't be reversed. And that's when it happened. The ship was destabilized by the impact of the debris. But the ship activated its own heat conduction system. All of this was the result of Shelton's careful design. And the purpose of the ship's trip to Helican. To Helican's planet seemed to be more than simple. Under Gale's persistent questioning, Shelton finally revealed a conspiracy. It turns out, Shelton had planned to return to Helican from the very beginning. And Endpoint was only the second base in the plan. In a way, the base on Endpoint Star was only a decoy. Because the real first base is Helican. It's Shelton's home planet. He has a lot of resources and connections on Helican. And now, he knows that Gale has the gift of predicting the future. This will be very helpful to the development of the first base. But Gale turned him down. She said to Gale, I want to get off the ship right now. Shelton didn't do anything about it. Gale had to threaten him. She wants to leave the ship the way she came in. But where would she go? It would take decades to get to Endpoint. Back on Trantor she'd be exiled from the Empire. But Gale insisted on leaving the ship. There are more than 2 planets in the galaxy. Shedden said as much. Gale's instincts were vital to the plan. And Gale's instincts told her to leave the ship. To get her off the ship. Meanwhile, the temperature inside the ship was still rising. So Gale had a trick up his sleeve. He ignored Shelton's advice. He took a sledgehammer and smashed it into the heat transfer system. If he kept hitting it like that, before they reached Helican, Gale would be roasted to death. There were only 2 choices left for Shedden. Either let Gale go, or watch Gale get roasted alive. Under these circumstances, Shelton had no choice. He had to let Gale go. They said goodbye through the hatch. Gale slipped back into the escape hatch she had come through. And the Raven went up in smoke in a circle of rock debris. Gale chose his final destination. It was his old home of Synax. The voyage would take 138 Imperial Standard years. Gale embarked on another long and lonely journey. This planet had its glory days. But now, they live on algae and fishing. Gale was born on this planet. Because of the climate, the sea level on Naxos. The sea level is rising every day. Soon, Knuckles will become a water balloon. On this planet, all scientific research and activities is prohibited. They no longer rely on science. They live for the awakening of their faith. They believe that the rising sea is a warning to the sleeping. If they overcome this challenge, they would be qualified for its awakening. Gale was a server in the Church of the Prophets. It's the pride of every parent to be an attendant in the church. Is the pride of every parent. Gale's parents were no exception. It's like the idea of us getting into Harvard. But the harsh climate made it harder and harder for them to survive. One night, Gale and 2 prophets came to an abandoned university to see if there was any forbidden activity. There were lights in the abandoned school. Gale saw in the room. Someone was hurriedly packing up books. It turned out to be Lecturer Thorn. He also knew that Gale had become a waiter. And what the attendants see as heretics. Thorn, who would not leave his knowledge behind. Gale advised him to leave this place immediately. Because the prophet considered this place to be contrary to the teachings. Any study of an analytical nature is contrary to the awakened faith. If the prophets find him, he would die. But Thorn calmly took out the Book of Folds and spoke to Gale about the importance of knowledge to civilization. He intended to give it to Gale, but Gale refused him. But Thorn always believed that there was still in Gale's heart, that there was still a shred of trust in knowledge. Eventually Thorn was captured by the prophets. He was about to face a brutal punishment. Thorn's feet were bound to a boulder, and his books sunk to the bottom of the freezing sea. Gale knew in his heart of hearts that the Church of the Prophets' so-called awakening was just a self-deception. So Gale jumped to the bottom of the ocean at night, and after searching for it, and retrieved the folded book. And in the days that followed, Gale studied mathematics and science day and night. Gradually Gale's parents began to notice that the sea level was rising. That the sea level was rising. And the seaweed they were cultivating was dying. But they couldn't do anything about it. That day Gale sneaked up on a smuggled messenger. She asked the messenger to send a formula to Kawater to enter the Empire's math competition. But not long after, the Church of the Prophets found out that Anashian had entered the math competition. Before they realized it was Gale, Mother tried to get him to stop, because what she was doing would put the whole family in danger. But Gale didn't give up. Finally that night, he received a reply from Trantor. It turned out that Gale had a brand new solution to the Abraxas conjecture. Shelton couldn't believe it. A little girl from an agricultural planet. That a young girl from an agricultural planet had solved a problem that had baffled countless geniuses for centuries. And Shelton himself had studied her solutions, proving that Gale was right. Shelton extended her an invitation to travel to Trantor. Before she left, Gale asked her parents to come with her to Kawartha. But in their eyes was a mechanical world of evil. He would have preferred Gale's death. He didn't want her to go to Trantor until Gale had the mark removed from her face. It was a sign that he was completely out of touch with his beliefs. There was no turning back. Her parents couldn't stop her. Eventually Gale boarded an Imperial ship and left the dying planet. The Dawn Emperor harvested 6 on his first hunt, already breaking the Dusk Emperor's record. His attendants told him Dusk's highest record was 3 a day. But just then, there was a gunshot nearby. It turns out that the Dusk Emperor has harvested a 4th one. But the Dawn Emperor was in a state of panic. He asked his attendants to hide the other 3 lizards, so that Dusk would think he had only harvested 3. He seemed to be hiding something. Luckily the Dusk brothers didn't notice anything unusual. This is Trantor's palace. It's the most glorious palace in the entire Galactic Empire. They've ruled the galaxy for over 12,000 years. This is the court of Yossi, the Imperial harem. There are beautiful women everywhere. The beautiful women everywhere are just a decoration in the court of Yosemite. They can only remember one day. It was also designed by Creon I. The Dusk brothers thought it was perfect. But the Dawn brothers didn't think so. Because he fell in love with Ray, one of the gardeners in the harem. Since she was 13 years old. Since she was 13 years old she's been a botanist in the harem. The same girl who was scared away. The girl who was scared away. Her father was also the palace ecologist. But today when the emperor asked about Ray's fall, she acted very panicky. The servants can only remember what the emperor. They want them to remember. They can only see the emperor. What they want them to see. It's a bit of a sad story. It's the ugly side of the empire. Ray recommended a plant to the emperor. Wolf's breath. This plant can relieve pain. It can also heal wounds quickly. Since then the Dawn Emperor has become more attentive to Xiaoli. He would often remotely control the spy dragonfly. He would watch her secretly while she was working. Whenever he had time he would go to the harem. And chat with her. He was really in love with her. Dawn asked Xiaoli, "Can you see the beauty in the world?" She could indeed see. She could see the roses in the harem. She could see the beautiful sunset. From their conversation. The Dawn Emperor is colorblind. For centuries. He's the only emperor with this defect. When he hunted, he hid his prey for the same reason. Because lizards and raptors have the ability to change color. It's hard to spot in the woods. And it doesn't matter much to the colorblind. It's a secret he's kept his whole life. But he told Ray all about it. That's why he jumped off the building. Ray suddenly said to the emperor, "If you want me to keep my secret, then push me down from here. This is the best way to ensure that I will not disclose the secret." But Dadi chose to touch her with love. At night, Captain Ritter was on his rounds. During his rounds Captain Ritter saw Dawn the Great's discarded prey. Captain Ritter has the power of invisibility. He seems to have the power of immortality. He was the one who executed the painter in the first episode. And his appearance has remained unchanged. This is a different kind of emperor. He doesn't have to worry about the empire. Every day he observes Ray's every move. Gradually the relationship between the two. Was further developed. He took off the imperial bracelet, removed the halo armor and Xiaoli and applauded for love. Ray even gave him a pair of color-correcting glasses. But the Great One spoke of his own difficulties. He couldn't draw attention to himself. And he couldn't let Day and Dusk find out that he was defective. Ray advised him to wear them secretly when no one was around. But the Great One still had concerns. If he was exposed, he would lose everything. And he had more than one defect. When shaking hands, his right thumb pressed against his left. While Day and Dusk are the opposite. Not only that, their lives, their eating habits are very different. It's not a problem for the average person. But for the Emperor of the Galactic Empire. For the Emperor of the Galactic Empire there is no room for the slightest problem. The Emperor then took Ray on a tour of the palace. He introduced her to Creon I. And the Emperor's replacement. The Emperor in the glass case. He was constantly receiving information. He is in constant contact with the consciousness of the other three emperors. If one of the emperors is assassinated or damaged, he will become a replacement. This surprised Ray very much. In fact the emperors are also very pitiful. They can only be considered as a test piece. That's why he was afraid of his brothers. If they find out they are different, then he will be replaced without a doubt. The purpose of their existence is to make a perfect replica, with no room for imperfection. So he can't change anything. He can't correct his vision. He can only continue to disguise himself, or end his life. But Ray offered him a third option, to run away. But Ray didn't know. A renegade emperor can't get out of here alive. Even if he hides in any corner of the galaxy, they will find him. Besides his face is the best recognized face in the galaxy. The most recognizable face in the galaxy. Ray recommended a biohacker to him. It said that he can change his face with a single cut. It's comparable to a face transplant. Even so, they can still track him through technical means. But Ray said as long as you're willing to change, any problem can be solved. In fact from the moment he jumped off the building, he has already made a resistance. Ray suggested that the Emperor should hide in the scarred area. For the Empire, the scarred zone represents defeat. But for the people of Chuanto, it's a new beginning. They will no longer be bound by the Empire. They no longer have to live under a simulator. They could look up and see clouds and stars. The Emperor used dragonfly spies to cross the security zone. He saw a different world. He saw the bustling streets. He saw a car full of people. He saw a scarred zone full of life. The Great One's heart was gradually changed. The star bridge on Trantor was destroyed. The base of the endpoint star has fallen. There was again a dispute between the Pope and the neighboring planets. The disasters that followed, they all signaled the fall of the Galactic Empire. The Day Emperor made the leap to the Sulla star system. The space guards told him, after a few hours of slow travel, to the heart of a young girl, he was joined by the cyborg Danmore. Humans can only jump in hibernation. But as a cyborg, but as a biochemist she can enjoy the light and shadow. And Gale has woken up during the jump before. That's why she's different. The Great One asked her what it felt like. But Denmore couldn't explain it. During the meal, she showed the Emperor her token. The Emperor recognized it at once. It was the Levita crystal from the Maiden Planet. It symbolizes the triple goddess. It's a devotee's prayer item. It corresponds to the three core tenets of the translucent cult. The emperor was curious. Why would a cyborg become a believer? Danmore said to him, when you came into the world, you and your brothers had a purpose. But the rest of us have to find it for ourselves. Danmore's answer took him by surprise. It wasn't long before they arrived on Maiden. The jump ship landed slowly in front of the Salt Palace gates. Before disembarking, Danmore chose to stay on board. But the emperor persuaded him to stay on board. But at the emperor's urging they all disembarked. They were greeted by Zafir Halima. As expected, he didn't give a damn about the emperor. Not only did he come out alone to receive him, she even gave him some of her leftover water. We can see the emperor's disdain. But he had to put up with it. Maiden is in orbit around the planet neighborhood, a moon with a serious water shortage. When the emperor arrived at Maiden, he realized the inhabitants wanted Halima to be the pope, including Garant himself. Because of the high price of fresh water on Maiden, they thought Halima could solve the water problem. But the emperor insisted on his choice. The reason he's here was to pull a vote for Garant. And at the same time, he promised the people that the empire would build a desalination system. On the Maiden planet, the empire will build a desalination system. This boosted Grutter's popularity. But at the funeral of the last pope, Halima suddenly interrupted Glatt and gave a powerful speech that the empire is stagnating. The stagnation of the empire is contrary to the beliefs of the triple goddess. The crowd was moved by Halima's speech and joined him in worshipping the triple goddess, including Danmore. The final result of the election will be changed. This put the emperor in a very bad position. But Danmore said that if she didn't kneel, it would be a sign that she had betrayed her faith. But the emperor still doesn't understand her. The Great is a clone. He even made an issue of Danmore's status as a cyborg. If you're such a believer, but you have the power to live forever, doesn't that go against the teachings of reincarnation? But then again, Danmore is a programmed cyborg. If kneeling is against the program, her body should not be able to kneel. But the emperor asked her, did you kneel of your own free will? Danmore didn't answer. He just said that his loyalty to the empire, above all else. And then came the news from the entourage that Halima's speech had been very well received. Her supporters were far ahead of Garant. Because of the lack of water, the Maiden planet was in danger. Dead and wounded refugees were everywhere. The emperor went to the refugee camp to find out what Halima was up to. He came to the refugee camp and asked him what he wanted. But Halima's words came straight from his mouth. The end of the dynasty. The emperor had to make her an attractive offer. In addition to the desalination system, a satellite security station. That way you get security and water purification all in one. Halima remained impassive. That's not what she wanted. It's the fact that he feels that the dynasty that's coming down the pike will destroy the galaxy. But the Great One still thinks he's a great man. That he and his brothers had accomplished so much. And then Halima interrupted him. That he was just a dead man. That he was just the pride of a dead man. He even mentioned Shedden's theory of destruction. That's just plain provocative. But even so, the emperor can't do anything about it. Because the number of people in the translucent cult is too large. There are 3 trillion people. It accounts for nearly 40% of the entire galaxy. What's even more surprising to the emperor is that the person behind the crash of the new bridge, it could be her. The Earth remembered Shelton's prophecy that one of the major religions in the galaxy, that a major religion in the galaxy was bound to start an agitation. And he was right. Danmore had an idea. She thought she could filter Halima's communications data. Remove words that refer to the same lineage. But the Great One didn't want to do that. He proved Shelton and Halima wrong. And this time he did it the way an emperor should. He challenged Halima. Halima once said, an emperor without a soul cannot see himself. But today he's going to do the opposite. He has decided to walk the spiral